pretty sure I'm not really going to surprise anyone when I say that I played Magic Carpet on the PlayStation. It's a relatively obscure game which didn't really sell too well to my knowledge, so I was really surprised to see that it made its way to GOG, where I discovered that wait, it has a sequel? Huh, the more you know. In terms of ports, Magic Carpet is pretty much perfect. I've had no problems running it, but the caveat with DOSBox, the emulation software it's running on, is that it requires some configuration beforehand. You can find the config file in the game's directory, and I'll put my settings in the description. Magic Carpet is a first-person shooter, developed by Bullfrog Productions and was released in 1994 for DOS systems. For a game released in that period, it really shows its age. But back then, its graphics were considered way ahead of its time, with open 3D environments which can change and morph over time, and other things like water reflections, water simulations, and visual modes like 3D and stereogram? What? It was Bullfrog's most ambitious project, and I suspect a contributing factor to this ambition was the game's designer, Peter Molyneux, the man behind hidden gems such as Goddess and Project Milo. I kid, of course, but maybe I'm being too harsh on the guy. He was the person behind the Fable series, which I never played, and Magic Carpet, well, is pretty okay. The story begins with a narration, telling you of the time when wizards discovered mana and conjured beings to do their bidding. That is, until they turned on them, of course. A master and his apprentice sought to cast a spell that would destroy his rivals, but only ended up shattering the world, and apparently Thanos snapped the master in the process. So it's up to Zanzibar, this guy, to restore equilibrium. Honestly, the story isn't that great, but it does give you a sense of purpose. Like most older games, it doesn't really do a good job of telling you what to do, with the first level simply throwing you off into the deep end. Basically, each level has the exact same goal: to collect mana. You get mana from killing enemies, possessing buildings, or the bodies of fallen wizards. Mana is then stored on a castle which you can build on virtually any terrain. And yes, that includes the ocean. The amount of mana you need for each level is percentage based, and can change depending on how many enemies are present. So if you trigger a trap that summons a kajillion bees, that's going to set your progress back a little, but at least you'll have more mana to play with. What sets Magic Carpet apart from other FPSs were its flight controls and open environments. I've seen complaints about the controls being very disorientating and unorthodox, and I can see where they're coming from. The idea of having to battle enemies on the land, sea, and sky, while at the same time having surprising mobility in the air, can be pretty unwieldy at first. Unlike other flight-based games, you don't really have to worry about crashing or flying too low, as the game will automatically adjust for it. So what about aiming? Well, Magic Carpet also has you covered there, because there's a good degree of auto-aim when attacking enemies. As long as they're not on the edges of your screen, your shots will connect. On a mouse and keyboard it plays just fine, and playing on a controller is an option, I just don't recommend it. The controls work well with the open level design. Very rarely are you ever confined in narrow spaces with predefined combat arenas, but even so, the requirement to build a base means levels have to be open to some extent. It's unfortunate that the game's world can't be fully appreciated due to its shockingly bad view distance, which can't be adjusted along with the field of view and aspect ratio. These levels also serve as a space for the game's dynamic systems. Because of Magic Carpet's openness, it allows the AI to wander freely, meaning battles can take place almost anywhere. You may be fighting worms one moment, but the second a wyvern attacks, it can get pretty hectic. Enemy interaction with the world itself is limited, but it's there. Crabs may appear harmless, but if they feed on enough mana, they become giant enemy crabs. Archers, on the other hand, don't really like the undead and tend to fight each other. Villagers will rebuild towns over time. Archers spawn from destroyed buildings, and I've even heard that vultures will gather around fallen wizards. Nothing I've said is really mind-blowing, but it is something I've noticed in comparison to other old games I've played, where things are mostly static and unchanging. This also extends to the music, which changes depending whether or not you're in danger. Oh yeah, I almost forgot this game has magic. Who'da thunk? The spells in this game are where things get really interesting. There's some good variety here. I think these spells in particular are pretty self-explanatory, so I'm going to focus on the more unique ones. The Meteor does exactly what's advertised, and is mainly used for crowd control and killing strong enemies. It never gets old. Ironically, despite its destructive power, it's not very good for destroying castles, since a weird bug happens if you spam too many meteors, and the building fuses with the level itself. If a wizard's castle fuses, it means they can't be eliminated, but I doubt you'd even want to cast that many meteors in the first place, because it absolutely tanks the frame rate. I mean, just look at this. Its biggest weakness is that it's a projectile, meaning it can be deflected. It's all fun and games spamming meteors, that is, until you're on the receiving end. If you want to counteract deflect spells from wizards and lone griffins, the lightning spell works just fine. But if it's a pack of griffins you're dealing with, the lightning storm may be what you're looking for. The undead army and volcanoes are mainly castle killers, absolutely devastating spells which will shred through any base with ease. The undead is a bit of a double-edged sword in the sense that they have no loyalty. Once they're done with the enemy base, they won't hesitate to fire on the next thing they lay their non-existent eyes on. It's best to just dispatch them quickly. Earthquakes and craters sound cool on paper. In practice, I've only used them maybe 3 times. The idea behind these spells is to quickly dispatch ground units by leveling the floor. You can change the entire look of levels if you spam these. Global Death is definitely the most unique spell, and takes quite a bit of understanding to use. Global Death is basically a short-range time bomb, which if used will start a timer and kill any enemy who's within that range. Those closer to you will likely die, and those further away may be killed depending how strong those enemies are. Most spells have their utility, but then you have spells like Accelerate, which is a useful spell. But it comes in 2 variants, forward and backward. Why not just combine them? Invisibility sounds nice, that is until you realize that you'll become visible again if you cast a spell, which is something you'll be doing 90% of the time. Switching between these spells is a bit of a hassle, because it's bound to the same buttons you use to cast your spells. Clicking left or right does what you'd expect, and pressing both at the same time opens your menu. What this means is that you can't cast both spells simultaneously. To make matters worse, it's possible to destroy your castle if you right-click while using any spell that you can hold to cast. I've done this on accident so many times I've lost count, and I don't think this was intentional either, since this only applies to those spells specifically. Despite its problems, the overall gameplay experience is a damn good time. I enjoyed rediscovering what each and every spell does, and I liked playing and experimenting with them. I enjoyed how challenging the game could be when it was fair, but it can get pretty repetitive and tedious. For 50 levels, you'll be doing exactly the same thing, and your enjoyment of the game in the long term is dependent on how enjoyable each level is. The worlds after 25 encourage different strategies, but they can be hit or miss at times. Some can take an excruciatingly long time to complete due to the scarcity of mana while competing with other rival wizards. Other worlds can be extremely brutal, with one level in particular featuring over 65 wyverns. I don't know about you, but that's a little overkill. This is without mentioning the various bugs, which can send your progress to a grinding halt. Despite this, Magic Carpet is pretty good, and after playing it, I can safely say that I enjoyed it just as much as I did back then. So why didn't it sell too well? Well, we have to go back to what I mentioned earlier, the graphics. It may surprise you, but back then not everyone had an RTX 2080 Ti just lying around, and Magic Carpet required expensive hardware to run, which not many gamers had. It was also directly competing with Doom 2, a far more recognizable and appealing first-person shooter. Magic Carpet was to 1994, as Crysis was to 2007, only it didn't really leave a lasting impact. Despite its poor sales, it managed to get a sequel a year later, which I'll definitely be checking out down the line. Okay, I think that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you soon, hopefully in the near future.